Their vacation at a luxury resort turned into a nightmare when racist cops assumed they didn't belong. In front of his terrified family, the father was handcuffed, unaware that the man they were targeting was an FBI agent. What happens when the truth is revealed? The shocking consequences will leave everyone stunned. Subscribe now to find out how this story unfolds. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. The sun hung high in the sky, casting warm rays over the luxurious resort. It was the kind of place that felt almost detached from reality, where worries were left at the door and time slowed to a lazy crawl. A soft hum of conversation floated through the air as guests lounged by the pool, sipping cold drinks and soaking up the afternoon heat. Laughter from children splashing in the water mingled with the distant sound of waves crashing along the shoreline beyond the resort gates. For Daniel Carter, moments like this were a rare luxury. A federal agent with years of service under his belt, he was used to the relentless demands of his job, always on the move, always alert. But today he had promised his wife Maya that they would leave the world behind, just for a weekend. They had planned this getaway for months, and Daniel intended to enjoy every second of it. He lay back on a sun lounger by the pool, wearing casual swim trunks and sunglasses, feeling the tension slowly drain from his shoulders. His wife sat beside him, immersed in a book she had been trying to finish for weeks. Maya was a striking woman, intelligent, elegant, and unapologetically outspoken. As a lawyer and community advocate, she knew how to navigate conflict with grace and precision, though she secretly longed for moments like these to escape the weight of her responsibilities. Their two children played in the shallow end of the pool. 12-year-old Elijah, tall for his age, was racing his younger sister Nia, who giggled as she tried to keep up with her big brother. Daniel smiled, watching them with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in months. It was a perfect afternoon, one that he hoped would last forever. But things like this rarely did. As Daniel reached for his drink, he noticed a figure approaching from across the pool deck. A man in a dark polo shirt, with the unmistakable stance of someone used to giving orders, was headed their way. His face was set in a polite but wary expression, the kind that suggested he was about to say something unpleasant while pretending to be professional. "Excuse me, sir," the man began, his voice clipped and formal. "I need to verify that you're a guest here." Daniel sat up slowly, lowering his sunglasses. "I am," he replied evenly, glancing toward his wife, who had now lowered her book and was watching the interaction with quiet interest. The man's polite smile didn't reach his eyes. "We just need to confirm. If you don't mind, could you tell me your room number?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. It wasn't the first time he had been questioned in a place like this, though it never stopped being exhausting. "We're in suite 214, he answered calmly. "Been here since yesterday." The security guard nodded but made no move to leave. "I'll have to double-check with the front desk. You understand, it's just policy." Maya sat up straighter, sensing where this was headed. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her tone polite but with an unmistakable edge. "No problem, ma'am," the guard replied, though his body language betrayed discomfort. He glanced between Daniel and Maya, his gaze lingering a little too long on Daniel. "Just doing my job." Daniel exhaled slowly. He knew this routine all too well. Daniel exhaled slowly. He knew this routine all too well. "Go ahead and check," he said, leaning back in his chair. The guard nodded and walked away, speaking into the radio clipped to his belt. Daniel could feel Maya's tension beside him. Though she hadn't said anything yet, her silence was the kind she used when calculating her next move, a habit formed from years of legal battles and public advocacy. "I knew it was only a matter of time," she muttered under her breath, flipping her book closed. "Let's not jump to conclusions," Daniel said softly, though he knew she wasn't wrong. They tried to relax, but the mood had shifted. Elijah and Nia, sensing something was off, wandered over from the pool. "Is everything okay, Dad?" Elijah asked, wiping water from his face. "Everything's fine, buddy," Daniel said, forcing a smile. "Go back and enjoy yourselves." But before the children could return to the water, the guard came back, now with 2 more security personnel in tow. Daniel's jaw tightened as they approached. "Sir," the guard said, now with a hint of authority in his voice, "I need to ask you to step away from the pool area until we can confirm your reservation." Daniel remained seated, keeping his tone calm and measured. "I just told you we're staying in Suite 214. You're welcome to call the front desk and confirm." One of the new guards, a younger man with a buzz cut, crossed his arms. "We've had some issues with non-guests sneaking in," he said, as if that justified everything. "It's nothing personal." "Doesn't feel that way," Maya interjected, her voice sharp. "We've done nothing wrong and you're harassing us in front of our children." The original guard shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting this to escalate so quickly. "Ma'am, please, we're just following protocol." Daniel stood slowly, towering over the guards but keeping his movements deliberate and non-verbal. "Look," he said evenly, "I've been polite and answered your questions. Now, I need you to stop making my family uncomfortable." The young guard with the buzz cut stepped closer, puffing out his chest. "Or what?" Maya was on her feet in an instant, placing herself between her husband and the guard. "Enough," she said firmly. "You've overstepped. We are paying guests, and if you don't believe me, call the front desk yourself." The guards exchanged glances, clearly unsure of how to proceed. A flicker of doubt crossed the face of the original guard. He lifted his radio again, muttering something into it. A tense silence settled over the pool area. Other guests were now watching, their murmurs creating a low hum of speculation. Some pulled out their phones, recording the interaction. Daniel noticed but said nothing. He had been in enough situations to know how quickly things could spiral out of control, especially when people like him were involved. The original guard lowered his radio after receiving a response from the front desk. He hesitated, then looked at Daniel with renewed suspicion. "They're saying there's no record of a reservation under your name." Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's impossible. We checked in yesterday." "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the pool area," the guard said, his voice growing firmer. Daniel felt his patience wearing thin, but he kept his expression neutral. "We're not going anywhere," he said quietly. The guards tensed, and Daniel could see where this was heading. He glanced down at Elijah and Nia, who were clinging to their mother's side, confusion and fear on their young faces. "Daddy," Nia whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel knelt beside her, brushing a wet curl away from her forehead. "That's okay, baby. Everything's gonna be fine." But deep down, he knew that wasn't entirely true. This was only the beginning. The poolside atmosphere, once calm and carefree, was now suffused with tension. Daniel stood firmly in place, his hands clenched but steady as he watched the security guards fumble with their radios. Maya kept a protective arm around their children, her sharp eyes flicking between the guards and her husband. The weight of the moment hung heavy between them. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled up near the resort entrance, their presence unmissable to anyone lounging by the pool. 4 officers stepped out, their sunglasses masking their expressions, their body language rigid and unyielding. They walked with purpose, their sights locked onto Daniel as if they had already decided he was the problem. Daniel exchanged a quick glance with Maya. He had been through enough in his career to recognize that look in the officer's eyes. Disdain, thinly veiled behind procedure. This wasn't going to be a conversation, it was going to be an interrogation. The lead officer, a tall man with a clean-shaven face, strode toward Daniel. "Sir, we got a call about a disturbance. I need to see some identification." Daniel stood tall, forcing himself to remain composed. "There's no disturbance. I'm staying here with my family and these guards have made a mistake." The officer's hand hovered near his belt, where a pair of handcuffs dangled ominously. "ID," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for discussion. Daniel reached slowly into his pocket, every movement measured. He knew how quickly things could escalate if they thought he was reaching for anything other than his wallet. His fingers brushed against the familiar leather fold of his badge. He pulled it out and held it up for the officers to see. Daniel Carter, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The officer's face remained impassive. He didn't even glance at the badge. I need real ID, not some fake badge from a novelty shop. Maya's sharp intake of breath was audible. Daniel could feel a simmering anger in his chest, but he kept it under control. This is my real badge. I'm a federal agent. The officer stepped closer, narrowing the distance between them. And I'm the Tooth Fairy. Let's go. Show me your license or we do this the hard way. Daniel knew exactly what the hard way meant. He had seen it happen too many times to people who looked like him. But today, in front of his family, he refused to let it happen without a fight. The presence of the police was unmissable, their arrival sending a ripple of unease through the once relaxed poolside atmosphere. 4 officers stepped out of their cruisers, their sunglasses masking any trace of emotion, their postures stiff and unyielding. They walked with a clear purpose, their sights locked onto Daniel as if they had already decided he was the problem. It was evident they had been given instructions. He was the target, and this wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be an interrogation. Daniel exchanged a quick glance with Maya. He had seen this look before, too many times throughout his career. The officer's eyes carried the same quiet disdain, thinly veiled behind the pretense of protocol. He knew exactly how this would play out if he wasn't careful. The lead officer, a tall man with a clean-shaven face and a hardened expression, strode toward Daniel with the air of someone who had already made up his mind. "Sir, we got a call about a disturbance. I need to see some identification," he demanded, his voice clipped and authoritative. Daniel stood tall, forcing himself to remain composed. He knew better than to give them any excuse to escalate the situation. "There's no disturbance," he said evenly. "I'm staying here with my family, and these guards have made a mistake." The officer's hand hovered near his belt, where a pair of handcuffs dangled ominously. His stance was clear: comply or else. "ID," he repeated, his tone making it clear that refusal wasn't an option. Daniel moved slowly, deliberately. He had seen too many situations like this take a deadly turn for someone who reached too quickly. His fingers brushed against the familiar leather of his badge, and he pulled it out, holding it up for the officers to see. Daniel Carter, Federal Bureau of Investigation. For a brief second, there was a flicker of something unreadable in the officer's face, but it disappeared almost instantly. "I need real ID," he said, his voice flat. He didn't even glance at the badge, not some fake badge from a novelty shop. Maya let out a sharp breath, her fury barely contained. Daniel felt the heat rising in his chest, but he kept it under control. "This is my real badge. I'm a federal agent." The officer stepped closer, invading his space. His smirk widened. "And I'm the Tooth Fairy. Let's go. Show me your license, or we do this the hard way." Daniel knew exactly what the hard way meant. It meant being thrown to the ground, handcuffed, dragged away in front of his wife and children, humiliated and treated like a criminal. He had seen it happen far too many times, and today he refused to let it happen to him. Moving carefully, he retrieved his driver's license from his wallet and handed it over. The officer took it without a word, glancing at the name and photo as if he were searching for an excuse to claim it was fake. The other officers stood close behind him, their stances rigid, their hands resting near their belts, ready to act at the slightest provocation. Maya stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "That badge is real, and so is that license. We've done nothing wrong, and you're harassing us for no reason." The officer barely spared her a glance. Instead, he turned to Daniel and, after a long pause, handed the license back with deliberate slowness. "You can't be here," he finally said, his voice dripping with false authority. "There's no record of you or your family in the hotel system." "That's a mistake," Daniel replied, his tone firm but restrained. "We checked in yesterday, suite 214. The officer's expression remained cold, unmoved by reason. "Well, looks like you're going to have to sort that out at the front desk. Right now you're trespassing." Daniel stared at him, incredulous. "I'm here with my wife and children. Do you really think I snuck into a resort like this?" The officer's smirk widened, but his eyes stayed hard. Wouldn't be the first time. That was it, the final straw. Maya stepped forward, her voice sharp with fury. "We are guests, and we aren't going anywhere," she snapped. "You're escalating this for no reason. If you lay another hand on my husband, I will make sure your names are on every news network by tonight." The officers shifted uncomfortably, sensing that they were drawing more attention than they had anticipated. Guests had stopped lounging, some pulling out their phones, capturing every moment. The lead officer, however, wasn't ready to back down. He made a subtle gesture to his fellow officers. "Sir, put your hands behind your back," one of them ordered, stepping forward with handcuffs in hand. Daniel stayed perfectly still, his jaw tightening. "You're making a mistake," he warned, his voice dangerously calm. The officer hesitated, as if sensing that Daniel wasn't bluffing, but instead of backing off, he grabbed Daniel's arm roughly. "Daddy!" Nia cried out, her small voice cracking with fear. Elijah took an instinctive step forward, his fists clenched, but Maya caught him before he could move. "Stay with me, baby," she whispered, though her own voice trembled with barely contained rage. The metal cuffs clicked around Daniel's wrists, the sound slicing through the thick silence. He didn't resist as the officer yanked him forward, but the humiliation burned deep. His children were watching in horror. His wife's face was a mixture of shock and rage. Maya's eyes locked onto the lead officer, her voice ice cold. "This is going to ruin you," she hissed. The officer sneered. "Is that a threat?" Maya's glare didn't waver. "It's a promise." Guests murmured, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others whispering as they recorded the scene. As Daniel stood silently, his hands cuffed behind his back, he saw the way Elijah's face twisted in confusion. His son was struggling to understand why his father, who had done nothing wrong, was being treated like a criminal. Nia sobbed quietly, clutching onto Maya's leg. Daniel took a deep breath, forcing down the rage boiling inside him. He knew that if he fought back, if he so much as raised his voice, things could spiral out of control, and that was exactly what they wanted. Maya knelt beside Nia, brushing her daughter's tears away with trembling fingers. "It's okay, baby," she whispered. "Daddy's going to be fine." But even as she said it, she knew, this was far from over. And when the dust settled, the ones responsible would have to answer for everything they had done. Elijah lunged forward, his voice cracking with fear, but Maya held him back, tightening her grip. "Stay with me, baby," she whispered, though her own voice trembled with fury. The metal cuffs clicked around Daniel's wrists with a cruel finality. He didn't resist as the officer yanked him forward, but the humiliation burned deep. His children watched in horror, their father being treated like a criminal for nothing more than existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maya's eyes blazed with rage. She turned to the lead officer, her voice sharp and unyielding. "This is going to ruin you." The officer sneered, pushing Daniel toward the pool deck with unnecessary force. "Is that a threat?" Maya's chin lifted, her tone cutting like glass. "It's a promise." Guests nearby murmured amongst themselves, their faces a mix of shock and disgust. Some shook their heads in disapproval, others hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. But many had already pulled out their phones, recording the moment as it unfolded, ensuring that this injustice would not go unseen. Daniel stood silent as the officers restrained him, his hands locked behind his back. He met Elijah's wide, terrified eyes, his son struggling to make sense of what was happening. Nia sobbed quietly, clinging to her mother's leg, her small body trembling with fear. Daniel took a deep breath, forcing down the rage that boiled inside him. If he gave in to it, if he fought back, if he shouted, if he showed even a hint of aggression, he knew exactly how this would end. Maya knelt beside Nia, brushing her daughter's tears away with trembling fingers. "It's okay, baby. Daddy's going to be fine," she whispered. But even as she said it, the words felt hollow. Daniel knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. And when the dust settled, the ones responsible would have to answer for everything they had done. As the officers led Daniel away from the pool, Maya's jaw tightened. She wasn't just going to let them walk away from this, not without consequences. And the consequences were coming. The tension in the air was suffocating as Maya watched her husband being escorted toward the resort entrance. His broad shoulders still upright, his head held high, but she knew the effort it took for him to mask his humiliation. His calm was for the sake of their children, because he understood that losing control would only give these officers exactly what they wanted. But Maya was not going to stay calm. Not now. She placed her hands on Elijah's shoulders, meeting his confused, frightened gaze. "Stay right here with Nia, okay? Don't leave my side." Elijah swallowed hard and nodded, pulling his little sister closer. Nia's tear-streaked face buried itself in his chest, her small body still trembling with silent sobs. Maya turned back toward the officers, her heart pounding with anger. "Let him go," she demanded, stepping forward. "You have no reason to do this." The lead officer glanced over his shoulder, his smirk deepening, as if enjoying the power trip. "Ma'am, back off," he said, his voice laced with mock patience. "I told you already, stay out of it, or you'll be next." Maya's voice rose, slicing through the murmurs of onlookers. "You're arresting an innocent man in front of his children. For what? Sitting by a pool? Do you even understand the kind of trouble you're bringing on yourselves?" One of the younger officers hesitated. He was clearly uncomfortable, glancing nervously at his superior. Around them, guests were shifting uneasily, still recording. The weight of public scrutiny was settling in, and even the officers could feel it. Maya saw the hesitation and pressed harder. "My husband is a federal agent," she enunciated every word with precision, her voice carrying across the pool deck. "A federal agent." The younger officer's face paled. "And when this blows up, and trust me, it will, I hope you're ready to explain yourselves to your bosses and the media." The lead officer's smirk wavered, replaced by a flicker of doubt. But he wasn't ready to back down. Not yet. The lead officer wasn't ready to back down just yet. Instead, he stepped toward Maya, his hand resting dangerously close to his holster. "I said, step back." Maya didn't flinch. Her gaze was unwavering, her stance unshaken. "Or what?" she challenged, her voice sharp and daring. "You'll shoot me? Arrest me for trying to protect my family? Go ahead." She leaned forward slightly, her words slicing through the tension like a blade. "But just know, when the press gets their hands on this, every single one of you is going to regret today." The lead officer sneered, shaking his head. "Big talk, lady. We hear it all the time." He smirked, his arrogance thick in the air. Maya's expression didn't change. Her voice dropped, deliberate and controlled. "You've never dealt with me," she said. "Do you have any idea who my husband is? Or who I am?" Before the officer could respond, one of the other policemen, an older man with a more cautious demeanor, stepped forward. He glanced around at the growing crowd, the dozens of phones recording every move they made. "Maybe we should de-escalate," he muttered under his breath. The lead officer hesitated, but it was already too late. The damage had been done. Maya's fierce gaze locked onto him, her fury simmering just beneath the surface. She knew the power of public perception, and right now the tide was turning against them. "Your actions are illegal," she said, her voice cold as steel. "You've arrested my husband without probable cause. I will make sure this entire department faces consequences if he is not released immediately." The officer, still gripping Daniel's arm, glanced nervously at his superior. "Maybe we should check this badge again." The lead officer scowled, his hesitation growing. Maya stepped closer, locking eyes with Daniel. His calm demeanor was meant to anchor her, to steady her rage, but she could see the unspoken message in his gaze. "Be careful. Don't let them push you too far." But she was far beyond caution. These men had humiliated her husband, terrified her children, and treated them like criminals. She wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not this time. Then, suddenly, the youngest officer among them made a mistake. As Maya tried to approach Daniel, he shoved her back. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as she stumbled, catching herself just in time. "That's enough," Maya shouted, regaining her footing. Elijah instinctively took a step forward, his fists clenched, his face burning with rage. But Maya held out a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "Stay with your sister," she whispered sharply. Then she turned, her eyes blazing, and pointed directly at the officer who had shoved her. "You just assaulted me," she said, her voice steady but lethal. "And you did it in front of witnesses. Do you have any idea how bad this is going to look?" The young officer froze, his expression shifting from defiance to panic. His colleagues exchanged uneasy glances, realizing just how far this had escalated, and that they were no longer in control. Maya squared her shoulders, fixing her gaze on the lead officer. "This is going to go public," she warned. "Every second of this is on camera. You've already traumatized my children and humiliated my husband." The lead officer opened his mouth to argue, but Maya didn't give him the chance. "You're done here," she said with finality. "If you don't release him right now, I will have reporters, lawyers, and the entire world coming after every single one of you." Daniel, still standing with his hands cuffed, glanced at Maya. A flicker of pride crossed his face. He knew one thing for sure. Once his wife started fighting, there was no stopping her. The officers wavered, caught between their desire to assert control and the realization that they were losing the battle. Maya took a step forward. "I want those cuffs off him now." Her voice sliced through the thick tension, demanding action. The crowd pressed in closer. Some guests murmured in support of Maya, while others continued recording, their phones trained on every movement. One guest whispered just loud enough for everyone to hear, "They're really going to regret this." Another added, "This is about to blow up on the internet. These cops are done. A mix-up in the system," he stammered, avoiding Maya's piercing gaze. Maya's lips pressed into a thin line. "A mix-up?" she repeated, her voice dangerously calm. "Your staff called the police on my husband. They humiliated my family. They handcuffed a federal agent in front of his children. And now you're telling me it was a mix-up?" The manager swallowed hard, visibly uncomfortable. "I sincerely apologize, ma'am. This is not how we conduct business." Daniel stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "Yet it is how we were treated. So tell me, what exactly are you going to do about it?" The manager hesitated, glancing between Daniel and Maya before turning to the front desk attendant. "Ensure that Mr. Carter's reservation is properly recorded and flagged for priority service." The attendant nodded quickly, typing with renewed urgency. Maya wasn't satisfied. "A reservation correction is not enough," she said. "We were publicly humiliated. My husband was assaulted by your security, and your staff allowed it to escalate." She gestured toward her children, who stood close, their faces still full of unease. "You think a room confirmation fixes the emotional damage this caused?" The manager's forehead glistened with sweat. "We deeply regret what happened," he said. "To make amends, we will fully refund your stay and extend complimentary accommodations for any future visits." Maya let out a sharp laugh. "You think a free stay makes up for this?" Before the manager could respond, the hotel doors swung open and a senior police officer stepped inside. His presence was immediately commanding. Crisp uniform, a hardened but calculating expression. The junior officers who had arrested Daniel followed behind him, looking noticeably less confident. The officer strode toward them. "I'm Assistant Chief Holden," he announced. "I received a report about an incident involving this family." Maya crossed her arms. "Perfect timing," she said. "I hope you're ready to explain why your officers handcuffed my husband without cause." Holden turned to the lead officer, his expression unreadable. "I reviewed the initial report, but I'd like to hear directly from Mr. Carter." Daniel straightened. My wife and I were by the pool with our children when security accused us of trespassing, despite us being paying guests. They called your officers, who ignored my federal badge, dismissed my ID as fake, and proceeded to handcuff me in front of my family. Holden's jaw tightened slightly. You identified yourself as a federal agent? Daniel gave a sharp nod. Multiple times. Holden turned slowly toward the lead officer. Is that true, Officer Landon? Landon shifted uncomfortably. He said he was an agent, but we've seen fake badges before. We couldn't take the chance. Holden's expression darkened. You couldn't take the chance that he was telling the truth? He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. This department takes incidents like this very seriously. An internal review will be launched immediately. Any misconduct will be dealt with accordingly. Daniel gave a bitter laugh. That's great, he said, but that doesn't undo what just happened. Holden met his gaze. You're right, he admitted, and I apologize on behalf of the department. Maya raised an eyebrow. An apology isn't enough? Holden inclined his head. I understand. I will personally ensure that formal measures are taken. Maya turned her attention back to the manager. And what about the hotel, she demanded. Are we just supposed to act like nothing happened? The manager paled even further. We deeply regret the misunderstanding, he stammered. We'll ensure our staff undergoes immediate training to prevent future incidents. Daniel's eyes remained locked on Holden. I want the officers involved held accountable, not just a slap on the wrist. Holden nodded. I give you my word, this will be investigated thoroughly. Daniel exhaled, his anger still simmering beneath the surface, but he gave a curt nod. Make sure it is. Maya placed a hand on his arm, squeezing gently. She knew this fight wasn't over, but for now they had done all they could. Holden turned to his officers. You're dismissed. Report back to me within the hour. The officers shuffled away, their postures tense and defensive. Maya looked back at Daniel. This isn't over. Daniel gave her a tired smile. I know. Maya's gaze softened, but the fire in her eyes remained. We'll make sure they pay for this. Daniel nodded, every single one of them. And with that they turned and walked away, knowing the real battle was just beginning. The hotel manager stood nervously behind the front desk, his hands fidgeting as the weight of the confrontation settled over the room. The tension was palpable. Daniel and Maya stood firm, their children close by, watching the adults with wide, uncertain eyes. Assistant Chief Holden surveyed the scene, his presence commanding, but Maya was unimpressed. She had dealt with men like him before, polished, measured, and skilled in damage control. Maya's voice cut through the silence. Confusion, she repeated, her tone sharp. Your staff called the police on us because of their confusion. My children watched their father get handcuffed like a criminal in broad daylight, and you think a refund and an apology will make this go away? The manager shifted uncomfortably. I'm truly sorry, ma'am, he stammered. This isn't how we handle things. Daniel folded his arms. But it is how you handled it, he said, his voice sharp. And now I want to know exactly what you're going to do about it. Before the manager could respond, the entrance doors swung open and a senior police officer strode inside. His crisp uniform and composed demeanor immediately drew attention. The junior officers from earlier followed behind him, their previously arrogant postures now subdued. Maya recognized him instantly. Assistant Chief Holden. She had seen him in public forums, a man known for his diplomatic approach and emphasis on public relations. His sharp gaze flicked between Maya, Daniel, and the officers before settling on the hotel manager. I'm Assistant Chief Holden, he announced smoothly. I received a report about an incident involving this family. Maya crossed her arms, her stance unwavering. Perfect timing, she said coolly. I hope you're ready to explain the circus your officers put on outside. Holden gave her a measured look before turning to the lead officer from earlier. "I've reviewed the initial report, but I'd like to hear directly from Mr. Carter." Daniel stepped forward, his tone even but firm. "My wife and I were at the pool with our children when security accused us of trespassing, despite us being paying guests. They refused to verify our reservation properly. Instead, they called your officers, who dismissed my federal badge, refused to check my ID, and handcuffed me in front of my family." Holden's jaw tightened slightly. "You identified yourself as a federal agent?" Daniel gave a sharp nod. "Multiple times. They didn't care." Holden turned toward the lead officer, his expression unreadable. "Is that true, Officer Landon?" Landon shifted uncomfortably. He said he was an agent, but we've seen fake badges before. We couldn't take the chance. Holden's eyes darkened. "You couldn't take the chance that he was telling the truth?" He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Let me be clear. This department takes incidents like this very seriously. An internal review will be launched immediately. Any misconduct will be addressed accordingly." Daniel let out a bitter laugh, frustration bubbling to the surface. "That's great, but it doesn't undo what just happened to my family." Holden met his gaze squarely. "You're right, and I apologize. On behalf of the department." Maya raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "An apology isn't enough." Holden inclined his head. "I understand. I'll ensure that formal measures are taken." Maya's sharp gaze flicked toward the hotel manager. "And what about the hotel? Are we supposed to pretend none of this happened?" The manager paled further under her scrutiny. "We deeply regret the misunderstanding," he said quickly. "We will be offering a full refund for your stay, along with complimentary accommodations for any future visit." Maya let out a sharp laugh. "Do you think a free room erases the trauma you caused my children?" The manager fumbled for words. We will also ensure our staff undergoes further training to prevent anything like this from happening again." Daniel's eyes remained locked on Holden. "I want the officers involved held accountable, not just a slap on the wrist." Holden nodded. "I understand your frustration, Mr. Carter. I give you my word this will be investigated thoroughly." Daniel exhaled slowly, his anger still simmering beneath the surface. He gave a curt nod. "Make sure it is." Maya placed a hand on his arm, squeezing gently. She knew this fight wasn't over, but for now they had done all they could. Holden turned to his officers. "You're dismissed. Report back to me within the hour." The officers shuffled away, their postures tense, their arrogance from earlier completely gone. Maya looked back at Daniel. "This isn't over." Daniel gave her a tired smile. "I know." Maya's expression softened, but the fire in her eyes remained. "We'll make sure they pay for this." Daniel nodded, his jaw tightening. "Every single one of them." With that, they turned and walked away from the lobby together, knowing full well that this battle was only just beginning. The tension in the air was suffocating as Daniel and Maya stood side by side, their children clinging to Maya's hands, sensing that the ordeal was far from over. Assistant Chief Holden fixed his sharp gaze on the officers who had made the arrest, his expression grim and unreadable. "You handcuffed a federal agent," Holden said flatly, his voice cutting through the silence. He turned to Officer Landon. "On what grounds?" Landon shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado completely gone. I thought the badge was fake," he stammered. Holden's eyes hardened. "You thought?" He let the words hang in the air, the weight of them sinking into every officer standing before him. "You didn't think, and now this entire department is going to have to answer for your actions." A heavy silence settled over the lobby, broken only by the soft hum of the front desk computers. The junior officers stood rigid, their faces pale. The reality of their mistake had finally caught up to them. Holden turned to Daniel, his tone more measured but no less serious. Mr. Carter, on behalf of this department, I offer my sincerest apologies. This will be investigated and disciplinary actions will follow. Maya stepped forward, her voice firm and unwavering. That's not enough. She met Holden's gaze with unwavering intensity. We want public accountability. Every single one of these officers and the hotel staff needs to answer for what they did. Holden nodded slowly, recognizing the weight of her words. There will be a formal apology, and any officer found guilty of misconduct will face consequences. The hotel manager, who had been standing nearby, cleared his throat, stepping in as if to smooth things over. We deeply regret what happened, he said quickly. We'll cover your entire stay and offer future accommodations at no cost. Maya's cold, unforgiving glare pinned him in place. Do you think that erases what our children just went through? She asked sharply. My husband was humiliated, and you stood by while your staff treated us like criminals. The manager stammered, his face paling. I'm very sorry. Maya leaned in slightly, her voice low but firm. You better be. And you better hope we don't see your faces in the news tomorrow. Holden turned back to the officers. His expression was unreadable, but his next words made it clear that their actions would not go unpunished. Dismissed, he said curtly. Report to me first thing tomorrow. The officers filed out silently, their postures slumped under the weight of what was to come. No more arrogance, no more smugness, just the quiet realization that they had made a grave mistake. As the last officer exited, Daniel hesitated for a moment, then turned to Holden. His voice was calm but carried an unmistakable weight. Make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Holden met his gaze, his tone sincere. I will. With that, Maya and Daniel gathered their children and walked toward the elevators, the tension in their shoulders slowly easing. As they stepped inside, Nia tugged at her father's sleeve, her small voice uncertain. Is it really over, Daddy? Daniel knelt down, brushing a tear from her cheek. He gave her a soft smile, though exhaustion still lingered in his eyes. Almost, baby. Maya rested a hand on his shoulder, her voice quieter now, but still filled with conviction. We fought back. We did the right thing. Daniel exhaled, nodding. Yeah, he said, his tired smile growing just a bit stronger. And they'll never forget it. The elevator doors slid closed, carrying them away from the chaos. The battle wasn't over, but they had made a difference. For now, that was enough. And as they ascended, Daniel held Maya's hand, knowing that no matter what came next, they would face it together. This story serves as a powerful reminder that injustice can happen anywhere, even in places meant for relaxation and peace. It teaches us the importance of standing up for ourselves and others no matter the circumstances. Daniel and Maya's unwavering strength in the face of discrimination highlights the necessity of knowing your rights and refusing to be silenced. Their story also emphasizes the power of accountability. When people in authority abuse their power, they must be held responsible for their actions. Moreover, this incident shows how vital it is to remain composed under pressure, especially in situations where emotions run high. Maya's persistence and Daniel's restraint turned a humiliating moment into a fight for justice, proving that dignity and courage can shift the balance of power. Lastly, the power of public scrutiny cannot be ignored. In today's digital world, awareness and exposure can be tools for change. Stand up, speak out, and demand fairness. Because silence allows injustice to thrive. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And why stop here? Check out more powerful stories waiting for you. Just click on the next video. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything.